She will get absolutely nothing. My sister Karen's voice cut through the room like shattered glass, not even waiting for the lawyer to open his briefcase. I froze in the doorway of my father's study, my 10-year-old son's hand clutched in mine. 8 years since I'd walked away from Thomas Enterprises, 8 years of struggling on a teaching assistant's salary while my father built his tech empire into billions. 8 years of explaining to my son why his grandfather's face appeared on business magazines but never at his birthday parties. Karen's eyes found mine, cold as December steel. Dad made it crystal clear you chose to walk away from the family business. You chose to be poor. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my son carried the one thing that would unravel everything they thought was certain, the truth my father had been too proud to speak in life. I felt the air leave my lungs as Karen's words landed. My son Eli's small fingers tightened around mine, his palm warm but trembling. I hadn't even stepped fully into the room, and already I was drowning. The study looked exactly as it had 8 years ago, leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves, that massive desk where Dad had built Thomas Enterprises from nothing to a tech behemoth. The air still carried the ghost of his cologne, sandalwood, and ambition. "Mom," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. I squeezed his hand, trying to anchor myself. "It's okay, baby," I lied. Nothing about this was okay. Around the enormous conference table sat the family I'd once belonged to. Karen at the head now, naturally, in a tailored black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her husband Neil beside her, his gold cufflinks catching the light. Uncle Rick with his perpetual scowl. Cousins, board members, family friends all waiting to divide the spoils. I guided Eli toward the only 2 empty chairs at the far end, feeling every step like walking through quicksand. My target clearance dress suddenly felt like a costume. I didn't belong here anymore, maybe I never had. "Look who finally showed up," Uncle Rick drawled, his voice carrying across the room. Charles's greatest disappointment. He looked at Eli and shook his head. Poor kid doesn't even know what he's missing out on. I felt heat rise to my face but kept my eyes forward. Don't show weakness. Don't give them the satisfaction. "Julia," Karen nodded, my name in her mouth sounding like an accusation. "I'm surprised Connor even contacted you." Mr. Connor, Dad's longtime attorney, shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. Professional to the end. The invitation said family, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Last I checked, I still qualify." Karen's laugh was like ice cracking. "Family? You walked away from family. You walked away from everything Dad built when you refused to marry Jackson Mills. You chose, what? Teaching poor kids art instead of helping run a billion-dollar company." Her eyes flicked to Eli. "You chose this life." I felt Eli stiffen beside me. At 10, he understood more than they gave him credit for. He'd grown up in our small apartment, watching me stretch every dollar, never complaining when his friends had the latest gaming systems while he had library books and second-hand toys. "I chose my son," I said simply. Rick scoffed. "Charles offered you everything. He would have welcomed both of you if you'd just done what was expected. Married the right man. Taken your place at the company." The right man. My voice sharpened. Jackson Mills was Dad's business partner, not my soulmate. He was 20 years older than me and made it clear my only value was the Thomas name. And yet he's now CEO of his own unicorn startup, Karen said with exaggerated sweetness. Funny how that works. I felt something dark and heavy pressing against my chest. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. What had I expected? That Dad had somehow changed his mind? That 8 years of silence had softened anything? Let's just get this over with, I said quietly. I assume Dad's lawyer has a will to read. Karen's smile was a weapon. Oh, there's a will. And it says exactly what I told you. Dad cut you out completely, wrote you off as dead. After what you did, refusing the merger with Mills Tech, embarrassing him in front of the entire board. She shrugged elegantly. Actions have consequences. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Mr. Connor finally cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. If everyone's ready, we should begin the reading. I nodded numbly, feeling the weight of failure crushing me from all sides. I'd come for closure, maybe, or some small acknowledgement. Instead, I was about to be officially erased. What I didn't know then was that my quiet, watchful son was about to change everything. 8 years is a lifetime when you're cut off completely. 8 years of your phone calls going to voicemail. 8 years of Christmas cards returned unopened. 8 years of seeing your father's face on CNBC while your son asks why his grandfather doesn't know him. I still remember the day I left. Rain pounding against the windows of Dad's mansion, the home I'd grown up in, as I stood in his study, my hands shaking. I can't marry Jackson, Dad. I don't love him. Dad hadn't even looked up from his computer. Love? This isn't about love, Julia. This is about the future of Thomas Enterprises. Mills Tech has the patents we need, and Jackson has agreed to the merger contingent on this marriage. So I'm just, what? A business transaction? A line item in your contract? He'd finally looked at me then, his eyes so like mine hardening. You're my daughter. You have responsibilities to this family, to this legacy. I'm pregnant, I'd whispered, the words falling between us like stones. The silence that followed was deafening. Get rid of it, he'd said finally, his voice flat. Jackson doesn't want children yet. It would complicate things. I still feel the shock of those words, the way they tore through me. How many times had I sat in that very office as a little girl, watching my father work, believing he hung the moon and stars. I left that night with nothing but a suitcase and the remnants of my trust fund. 2 days later, my access cards stopped working. A week after that, Karen called, the only time in 8 years, to tell me Dad had written me out of his will and forbidden anyone from mentioning my name. I made it work, somehow. Found a tiny apartment across town. Got a job as a teaching assistant at an elementary school. Had Eli. Finished my degree at night while my elderly neighbor watched him. Built a life that was small but ours. The hardest part wasn't the struggling. It was explaining to Eli, as he grew older, why we never saw Dad's side of the family. Why the grandfather whose company made the tablets his classmates used never acknowledged his existence. Is it because of me? He'd asked once, 6 years old and too perceptive. No, baby. Never because of you. I'd pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair. Sometimes grown ups make choices based on pride instead of love. It's not about you or me, it's about Grandpa's choices. I'd tried, over the years. Sent photos of Eli. Called on birthdays and holidays. Even drove to the mansion once when Eli was 5, only to have the security guard turn us away. He's not getting any younger, the guard had said quietly, a rare moment of humanity. Neither are you. Maybe try again. But pride runs deep in the Thomas bloodline. I kept my father's last name, the only piece of him I had left, but I stopped reaching out. Stopped hoping. Until the call came that he was gone. Karen hadn't bothered to tell me herself. It was Connor, Dad's attorney, voice gentle over the phone. I thought you should know, Julia. The service is Saturday. I went to the funeral but stood at the back, Eli's hand in mine. Karen saw me but turned away. I didn't approach the casket. What was there to say that hadn't drowned in 8 years of silence? The invitation to the will reading arrived 3 days later. No note, just a date and time. I almost threw it away. What was the point? I knew what the will would say. But Eli found it, his eyes serious as he studied the heavy cream paper. We should go, Mom, he said quietly. I think it's important. I looked at my son, so thoughtful, so unlike the cutthroat world of Thomas Enterprises, and nodded. Okay. But don't expect anything, baby. We'll go, we'll listen, and then we'll come home. To our real life. Little did I know our real life was about to be turned upside down. Mr. Connor cleared his throat, the sound almost apologetic in the tense silence. Light filtered through the heavy curtains, dust motes dancing in beams that fell across the polished conference table. I focused on those floating particles, needing something, anything to look at besides the expectant faces around me. I'll begin with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Charles Edward Thomas, Connor said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. His voice took on that measured cadence lawyers use, as if the rhythm itself could soften harsh truths. I felt Eli shift beside me, his legs swinging slightly under the table, not quite reaching the floor. He seemed oddly calm, his eyes moving methodically around the room, taking in details I was too overwhelmed to notice. Connor began with the legal preamble, words washing over me in waves I couldn't quite grasp. My mind kept drifting to the last time I'd been in this room, standing before my father, one hand protectively over my still flat stomach, his expression hardening as I refused to bend to his will. To my daughter Karen Elizabeth Thomas, Connor's voice pulled me back. I bequeath the family residence at 47 Lakeview Drive along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein. Karen's expression didn't change, but her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. She'd already known. Additionally, Karen will assume my position as Chief Executive Officer of Thomas Enterprises, with full voting rights of my shares, contingent upon board approval. Neil reached over to squeeze Karen's hand. The gesture seemed rehearsed somehow, a public display of solidarity. To my brother, Richard Thomas, I leave my lake house property in Tahoe, along with my collection of vintage watches and 20% ownership stake in Thomas Enterprises. Uncle Rick nodded slightly, as if receiving only what he was due. The cigar between his fingers remained unlit, a prop he'd carried for as long as I could remember, a symbol of the success he'd achieved in my father's shadow. Connor continued down the list. Cousin Paul received the car collection. My father's executive assistant got a generous pension. Charitable donations were outlined in meticulous detail: the Children's Hospital, the University Engineering Program, the tech incubator Dad had founded. Each bequest felt like another door closing. Each recipient named was another confirmation of relationships maintained, connections honored, while Eli and I had been cast aside. I knew what was coming. I'd prepared myself for it. Still, when Connor paused, adjusting his glasses once more, I felt my heart rate quicken. Regarding my daughter, Julia Adeline Thomas, he read, his voice softer now. I held my breath. Around the table, eyes shifted toward me, some curious, some smug, some carefully blank. As previously documented, she has chosen to remove herself from family obligations and responsibilities. Therefore, she shall receive no portion of my estate or business holdings. There it was. The final dismissal. I'd expected it, but the words still cut deep, reopening wounds I'd thought long scarred over. Karen's slight smile felt like salt in those wounds. Uncle Rick cleared his throat, the sound tinged with satisfaction. "Well, that's settled," Karen said, already reaching for her leather portfolio. "Connor, I assume you have the paperwork for the CEO transition." "There's more," Connor said quietly, still looking at the document. "What more could there be?" Karen's voice sharpened. "The will is clear." I was asking myself the same question. What more could Dad possibly have to say about me? Wasn't erasure enough? That's when Eli straightened beside me. His movement was subtle, but in that room of predators, all eyes caught it. He reached into his backpack, the one I'd told him to leave in the car, the one he'd insisted on bringing, and pulled out a white envelope. "You forgot about the video," he said, his voice clear and unafraid in the sudden silence. "Grandpa recorded it for today." The room froze. Karen's pen stopped mid-signature. Rick's cigar dropped slightly from his lips. And I turned to my son in complete confusion, wondering how the child I'd raised far from all this could possibly know something about my father that I didn't. The envelope in Eli's hands seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Cream-colored, slightly wrinkled at the edges, unremarkable except for the words scrawled across the front in my father's distinctive handwriting, "For Connor only if necessary." "Eli," I whispered, my voice catching, "where did you get that?" My son's eyes met mine, so serious for a 10-year-old. "Grandpa gave it to me. Last year." "Last year?" The room tilted slightly. "You never saw Grandpa last year." "I did." His voice was small but steady. "Remember when Mrs. Rodriguez took me to the Science Museum? We stopped at Grandpa's house first." The memory clicked into place, my elderly neighbor offering to take Eli to the natural history exhibit he'd been begging to see. A day I had to work overtime. I'd been grateful for the help, never imagining. "Mrs. Rodriguez is friends with Grandpa's housekeeper," Eli continued, eyes downcast now. "She said I should meet him at least once. So we went to his house." My throat tightened. "You never told me." "He asked me not to." Eli's fingers traced the edge of the envelope. "He said it would just make you sad, and he didn't want that. He said when the time was right, I should give this to Mr. Connor." Karen pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping against hardwood. "This is absurd. Some secret meeting with a child? A mysterious envelope? Connor, you can't seriously entertain this manipulation." Connor's expression remained neutral, professional, but his eyes had never left the envelope. "May I?" he asked Eli gently, extending his hand. Eli nodded and passed it over, the exchange careful, almost ceremonial. Connor examined the handwriting, turning the envelope over. "This appears to be Charles's handwriting." "Anyone could have forged that," Rick interjected, leaning forward. "The kid's probably been coached." I felt heat rise to my face. "By whom?" "Me. The person who had no idea this envelope existed until 30 seconds ago." Connor held up a hand, silencing the growing tension. He slid a letter opener along the sealed edge, removing a folded note and a small USB drive. The room went silent as he read the note to himself, his expression changing subtly surprise, then something like resignation. "This is indeed from Charles," he confirmed, looking up. "It's dated 8 months ago, notarized by my partner. It instructs me to play this video recording in the event that." He glanced at the note again. "The sharks start circling Julia or the boy." Karen laughed, the sound brittle. "This is completely irregular." The will was clear. "The will," Connor replied evenly, "is the legal document of record. This," he held up the USB drive, "is something Charles wanted shared, apparently. As his attorney, I'm obligated to honor that request." He moved to the sleek laptop at the end of the table, inserting the drive. The projector on the ceiling hummed to life, casting a blue glow onto the white wall. I couldn't breathe. 8 years of silence, and now, what? What could he possibly have to say that he couldn't have said while alive? What message was so important it had to be delivered from beyond the grave, through my son? Eli's hand found mine under the table. I expected to feel his fingers trembling, but they were steady, warm, certain. Like he knew something I didn't. "Mom," he whispered, "it's okay." The loading screen appeared, then a video file. Connor glanced around the room, his expression unreadable, and clicked play. My father's face filled the wall thinner than I remembered, older, but unmistakably him. He sat at this very desk, in this very room, wearing the blue sweater I'd sent him 3 Christmases ago. The sweater I thought he'd thrown away. He looked directly into the camera, and for a moment, it felt like he was looking right at me. 8 years dissolved in an instant. "Hello, Julia," he said, his voice filling the room. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and things have gotten complicated." The world around me faded. There was only his voice, his face, and the weight of everything unsaid between us. "Hello, Julia." 2 words, and I was a little girl again running into his study with a drawing, hoping for 5 minutes of his attention. My father's face filled the projection, lines deeper than I remembered, hair thinner, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that could dismantle a boardroom, were exactly the same. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and things have gotten complicated." He shifted slightly, adjusting his position. Not nervous. Charles Thomas was never nervous, but uncomfortable, like a man unused to vulnerability. Which means Karen and Rick are doing exactly what I expected them to do. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Predictable to the end. Someone, Karen, probably made a small, indignant sound, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the screen. I've had 8 years to think about the last conversation we had in this room. He gestured to the space around him, the same space where we now sat, watching his ghost speak. 8 years to replay your words, and mine. 8 years to realize that I was wrong. My breath caught. In 32 years, I'd never heard my father admit he was wrong. About anything. "I made you a pawn in a business strategy," he continued, his voice steady but softer than I'd ever heard it. "I put Thomas Enterprises above your happiness, above your right to choose your own path. When you refused to comply, I cast you out, not because you deserved it, but because your independence threatened everything I thought I knew about power and control." He paused, looking down at his hands. They were older hands than I remembered, veined and spotted with age. "Then your boy came to see me." I felt Eli straighten beside me. On screen, my father's expression changed, softened in a way I hadn't seen since my mother was alive. "Smart kid. Quiet. Has your eyes." He nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself. He showed me pictures of your apartment, your little garden on the balcony. Told me about your job teaching art to elementary students. How you make pancakes every Sunday even though you're exhausted. My vision blurred with tears. I hadn't known Eli carried these details of our life, treasured them enough to share. He asked me why rich people are sometimes mean. Not accusatory, just curious, the way kids are. Dad's laugh was short, surprised. No one talks to me that way anymore. No one has in years. I squeezed Eli's hand under the table. Brave, beautiful boy. It made me realize something, Julia. I built an empire, but I lost my soul in the process. I surrounded myself with people who wanted what I had, not who I was. Even Karen, he glanced off screen briefly, then back, sees me as Thomas Enterprises, not as her father. Not really. I risked a glance at Karen. Her face was stone, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. The official will, the one Connor just read, is what everyone expects. It's what keeps the shareholders calm, the board happy, the family narrative intact. He leaned closer to the camera. But it's not my final word. He reached for something off-screen, then held up a document. This is a codicil to my will, executed 6 months ago and held in trust by Connor's firm. It redirects majority ownership of Thomas Enterprises to you, Julia, with Eli as secondary beneficiary until he turns 25. The room erupted. Karen shot to her feet, face contorted. Rick swore loudly. Cousins I barely knew anymore began talking all at once. But my father's voice cut through it all, commanding attention even from beyond the grave. Julia will take my seat as chairperson, effective immediately. He continued as if he could hear the chaos his words were creating. Not because she's my daughter, but because she's the only one with the moral compass this company desperately needs. His eyes seemed to find mine through the screen, across time and space and death itself. I was wrong about what makes a legacy, Julia. It's not market share or stock prices. It's not even the Thomas name. It's integrity. And you living in that small apartment, working that modest job, raising that remarkable boy, you have more of it than anyone I've ever known. He looked down, then back up, a lifetime of regret in his expression. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so damn sorry it took me this long to see it. The screen went black, but the silence that followed was anything but empty. It pulsed with shock, rage, disbelief, emotions so thick I could almost touch them. Karen moved first, launching to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. This is a farce, she hissed, each word precise and venomous. A dying man's delusion. Connor, you can't possibly. The codicil is legal, Connor interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. He removed a sealed document from his briefcase. Properly executed, witnessed, notarized. I've had our legal team review it extensively. I'll contest it, Karen spat. The board won't accept this. They won't let some teacher who hasn't set foot in the company for 8 years suddenly take control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Actually, Connor said, sliding the document across the table toward me, Charles spoke with each board member individually in the months before his death. They're expecting this transition. My hands trembled as I reached for the paper. The weight of it, literal and figurative, was overwhelming. I'd spent 8 years building a small, quiet life for Eli and me. A life I was proud of. A life that suddenly seemed very far away. Uncle Rick pushed his chair back with a screech. This is Thomas's revenge, he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. One last power play from beyond the grave. It's not revenge, Eli's voice cut through the chaos, startling everyone. He'd been so quiet, so still beside me, that the adults had almost forgotten his presence. Grandpa said it was fixing a mistake. Karen's laugh was ugly. And I suppose he told you that during your secret little meetings. How convenient. Eli didn't flinch. He was sad. He kept the pictures I gave him in his desk drawer. The one that sticks sometimes. The detail so specific, so undeniably true about my father's old desk landed like a physical blow. Karen's expression faltered. Julia, Connor said gently, there's more. The house is yours as well. Charles left instructions that Karen and Neil should have 60 days to relocate. Neil, silent until now, slammed his hand on the table. This is our home. We've lived there for 5 years. It's my home, I whispered, surprising myself. It's where I grew up. Where my mother lived. Memories flooded back, running down the grand staircase on Christmas mornings, helping my mother plant roses in the garden, sitting in the window seat of my bedroom reading for hours. Before ambition consumed my father. Before cancer took my mother. Before everything changed. You can't do this, Karen's voice broke slightly, the first crack in her perfect facade. You don't even want this life. You walked away from it. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. My sister. Once, we'd been inseparable. When had that changed? When had power and position become more important than the bond we'd shared? I walked away from being used as a business transaction, I said quietly. I never walked away from being a Thomas. The press will have a field day with this, Rick muttered. Stock will plummet when they hear Charles passed over his own CEO for his estranged daughter. Or, I said slowly, pieces falling into place, they'll hear that Charles Thomas, legendary businessman, planned this succession carefully. That he recognized the changing landscape of tech requires new vision. That Thomas Enterprises is evolving, not fracturing. Connor nodded slightly, approval in his eyes. The press release is already drafted. Charles thought of everything. Of course he had. Even in death, my father was 3 moves ahead. The room began to empty. Board members and distant relatives filed out, whispering among themselves. Karen remained frozen, her world collapsing around her. I felt a pang of sympathy beneath my shock. She'd built her entire identity around being Charles Thomas's chosen successor. Karen, I said softly, we should talk. Not today, but soon. There's a place for you in all this. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in 8 years. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out. Eventually, only Eli, Connor, and I remained in the vast room. Sunlight streamed through the windows now, catching dust motes in golden beams. What happens now? I asked Connor, feeling adrift in the sudden sea change of my life. Connor smiled slightly. Now, Miss Thomas, you go home. Rest. Process. The company has waited 8 years for you, it can wait a few more days. Home. But where was that now? Our small apartment with its careful economies and hard-won comfort? Or this mansion with its painful memories and new beginnings? As if reading my thoughts, Eli slipped his hand into mine. Can we plant roses in the garden again? He asked quietly. Like in the pictures of Grandma you showed me. And just like that, I knew. Home wasn't a place, it was this small, wise person who had somehow bridged the chasm between the life I'd left and the life awaiting me. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. We can plant all the roses you want. Some wounds take a lifetime to heal. Others require reaching across the void, sometimes through the hands of a child, to find redemption. My father spent his life building walls around his heart, around his company, around his legacy. In the end, it took his grandson, a boy he barely knew, to dismantle those walls brick by brick. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always come when you expect it or how you imagine it. Sometimes it arrives years later, in an envelope carried by small hands. Sometimes it speaks through a screen, through the voice of someone no longer here to embrace. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or real estate holdings. It's measured in pancake sundaes and balcony gardens and a child who sees the best in you even when you're broken. Most importantly, I learned that legacies aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in moments of courage, like when a 10-year-old boy visits a grandfather he's never known, or when a father finally says I was wrong, or when a daughter finds the strength to begin again. We're all building our legacies, word by word, choice by choice, day by day. The question isn't what we'll leave behind, it's who we'll touch along the way, and how deeply they'll feel our love long after we're gone. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever stood at the crossroads of pride and reconciliation, or struggled with family wounds that seem too deep to heal, I want to hear your story. Share in the comments a moment when forgiveness found you unexpectedly. Or tell us about a child in your life who showed wisdom beyond their years. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. This channel is dedicated to sharing stories that remind us of our common humanity, stories that pierce the veil between success and struggle, between wealth and worth, between the lives we show the world and the truths we hold inside. If you found meaning in Julia and Eli's journey, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Each week, we dive into powerful narratives that challenge our perceptions and open our hearts. And remember, it's never too late to heal what's broken. It's never too late to speak your truth. And sometimes, the most profound legacies are built in the quiet moments between the people we love most. Until next time, hold those you love a little closer today.